Okay, so my name's Kent Dueck. I'm the executive director and founder of Inner City Youth Alive, and I've been here in this role for about 33 years. I love our community and working in Winnipeg's North End. And we're sitting here in the Story Studio. Story Studio is a new space that we developed, and it's intended to help us kind of get people's message out. And today we're going to have a really interesting show. We're looking forward to sitting here with my good friend Sel Burrows. Sel, you've been called a cat-loving hippie, I think is one.
That's right.
A knight in thrift store armor is another. And Sel, I bet you there's been a few names that we couldn't even put on air.
Well, actually, the one they use in Point Douglas is our pit bull. Yeah.
Yes, the pit bull of the North End.
Yes.
That's another one of them.
Yeah.
2017, you received a recipient of the Order of Manitoba. Tell us a little bit about that.
It was totally out of the blue, totally unexpected. I've been an activist all my life, going back to when I was 16 years old and doing stuff trying to end apartheid in South Africa, always behind the scenes. And then in the last few years, I've ended up going on the media and talking a lot about communities in danger and how communities can make themselves safer. And the media seemed to pick up some of it, and somehow or other, the people who make those kind of decisions, I still don't know who nominated me, but I was quite honored, and I think it was an honor to my community.
You recently reached a significant milestone in your birth. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I just turned 75. I'm loving it. I'm enjoying getting older. I now really understand why some communities value elders, because I sure wish I had the knowledge when I was 21 that I have now. And mind you, I wish I had the energy I had when I was 21 now.
It's a trade-off.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? You look great, Sel, and I mean, it's I guess the lesson there is work hard in the neighborhood, and you'll look as rested and energized as you look right now. You've done so much for our community, and so I don't officially say thank you from Inner City Youth Alive.
The thanks is the change in the community, the health of the community, and the relationships that we build. And when somebody phones me who has a long criminal record, talking about how he wants to make his community safer and could I get rid of those gang guys across the street, that's the thanks I get.
Yeah, and you've effectively shut down quite a number of meth houses in your community. How many in 1 year?
Oh, it's impossible to keep track. One of the things I did when I retired, which was quite a while ago, is I decided I'd do the things that I'm skilled at, and I wouldn't bother much with the things that I was paid to do when I worked, and one of them was record keeping. So it's all on the computer somewhere. But in the last 2 months in North Point Douglas, we have shut down 6 what I call meth nests. They're set up to deal meth, but these poor young people come in with their stolen goods and their backpacks, and they hand that in, and they're given meth in return, no cash involved.
Yeah.
And then the place that they go to, the stolen goods are whipped out really quickly. One neighbor called me. He said, they just took about 100 fire extinguishers out of that place. They took them about half an hour to get all those fire extinguishers out to that pickup truck, and they were obviously stolen.
Wow.
And a whole bunch of apartment block owners are running around replacing their fire extinguishers right now.
Crazy. Well, one of the things that our goal for this little podcast was kind of centered around the idea of dangerous ideas for social change. And so we know that the whole point of speaking freely and sharing ideas that can push the envelope a little bit is about addressing issues that are very, very important and creating social change. And so it's perfect to be talking to Sel on this because you and I have in common our propensity to tell the truth even if it hurts.
That's true. That's correct. And we've stood shoulder to shoulder on a few things now.
Yeah, we told the truth roughly exactly 3 years ago, I believe, right around this time.
That's right.
And it had to do with the issue of absenteeism. Something that I've seen for the 33 years, I guess it's coming on that I've been in the neighborhood, and something that for me was just we're busy running programs here in our center. We're not a school, but I would note as I would go about the work during the day, how many kids were not in school, and it'd be the middle of the afternoon, and you'd see, lots of kids, 10, 11, 12, and the teens walking around the neighborhood, and it over the years, it just kind of struck me that this is there's a problem here. Sel, how have you experienced this?
Well, I go back 10 years on this issue.
Mm-hmm.
I moved back into North Point Douglas 12 years ago, and it took me 2 years to really hit home that there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of kids not going to school. And I happen to believe that if we want to get rid of poverty, there's some fairly basic things. And one of the most important is that kids get an education. This day and age, without an education, you just can't earn a decent income. And also, if you don't get an education, you don't learn. If you don't attend school, you don't learn about getting to work on time and things, and learning how to get along with a teacher you don't like, just because you're going to have a boss you don't like at some point in time. So if we want people not to live in poverty, we as a society have a responsibility to see that they get an education, and they weren't.
Yeah.
So, I'm quite clear. I'm a strong New Democrat. I used to be Ed Schreier's executive assistant way back, and I've chosen to live and work in the inner city, volunteer. And so I had access to ministers of education going back 10 years. And now, for some strange reason, I have access to conservative ministers of education who are listening to me. I'm on number 6 Minister of Education discussing the issue of school absenteeism. And, a lot of patting on the head saying, oh, great, and not a lot of action. And it's been very, very discouraging. But then I got some stats, and this is what happened 3 years ago.
So let's talk a little bit about those stats. Yeah. It's an interesting process for you to get them.
Yes. I talked to the chair of the school board and said, this is the Winnipeg 1 school division. Mm-hmm. And she put me in touch with the senior clerical person at the school division, and I said I would like to know, because I'd gotten general stats before, I could never nail it down. So I said, I want to know how many kids were absent at Calvin High School, which is a upper class school, and St. John's High School, which is an inner city school, both on May 30th, 2016. And a week later, I got the stats. 38 kids were absent at Calvin, and it's got a bigger population. 169 kids were absent at St. John's High School. All of a sudden, with those stats, I was started to get people to take it a little more seriously. When it was an ephemeral concept that a lot of kids were missing school and it was a bad thing, and then out of that, we ended up getting you and I meeting with the Minister of Education, and
we put a press release out, I believe.
That's correct.
And I can recall within the 24-hour period, something in the neighborhood of 9 interviews, 10 interviews.
That's right.
Radio, TV, everybody was hot and active. It really woke everything up.
It gave people concrete knowledge that they couldn't ignore, and the media likes that. And the media is important because that's who communicates these issues to the general population.
Yeah. So as I recall, those in the coming days and weeks, we had opportunity to speak at Winnipeg School Division number 1, and at that point we were pushing on a task force, a provincial task force, to address this issue. And we were, we'd created that sense of urgency. People were paying attention. You gave a rousing challenge to the school trustees that evening.
We did.
Well, sure, we did. We were both pretty good, so we did a great job. But started to stir things up. It's interesting. I'm going to kind of jump way ahead in this process because kind of uncanny, almost like a prescient sense that we had foreknowledge of what was going to be coming out in the Tina Fontaine report. Tina Fontaine.
Right. Yep.
Just recently, we found out that one of the key recommendations. Of course, there's some critiques on those recommendations, but still work to be done. But one of the main references there was the importance of the issue of absenteeism.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about this, Sel, and I was having this memory of when we eventually got this task force going, and I know at one point we were going through this process of hearing the actual direct narratives on 20 of the worst cases of absenteeism. And so we were listening to this, and I was kind of I was taking notes feverishly, trying to think, what are the causal links, what's going on, what is the common threads? And one of the common threads was that the way the stories all ended was kind of the inability to keep track of where these kids were. And so it made me think about, I guess, essentially, Tina Fontaine's story was a story where we lost track of a very, very important 14-year-old girl.
And going way, way back, I had an experience. I was chair of the Point Douglas Residence Committee, and we had hired some young Indigenous kids for the summer project. And one of the kids, his second year, and he'd been great, and then all of a sudden he hadn't shown up for a while. So I phoned his uncle where he was staying, and and chatting with the uncle, he'd been bullied, and that's why he'd been staying away. And I said, well, which school is he going to? Oh, he hasn't gone to school for 2 years. So then I phoned the assistant superintendent of schools, and one of the things that's happened over the years is these guys answer the phone when I call them, and they're afraid they might be on the front page of the Free Press. No, that's not true. No, I mean, this guy was really good, and so I gave him this name, and he was sitting there on his computer and typing this name in, and he says, well, he's not a student of Winnipeg 1 School Division. I said, well, he sure was, but he hasn't attended for a while. Give me a second here. And he, oh, here he is in the archives. You're right. He hasn't been at school for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And this was one of the best school assistant superintendents and they just lost him, and nobody cared. And he was a great kid. He came to work every day. He had all sorts of potential. But without his grade 12, he's going to have a difficult time. Interesting.
Nobody cared. One of the things that's been striking for me in this process of the last 3 years, I tallied up, I believe we've had 6 meetings in 3 years to discuss this issue of absenteeism. And what I anticipated, Sel, was that this would be a simple thing to gather people behind, because everyone agreed it was a problem.
Yeah.
And I don't want to impugn motive or say that I know how people are thinking about this, but it seems like it's caught up in bureaucracy. The problem has been studied ad nauseum. The data has been gathered, then fed back to the source of the data. So that it's been this sort of echo chamber.
Well, and I'm involved in a lot of other issues as well as this. And this is what happens so many times. Solving the problem is handed over to the people who ignored or created the problem so many times. I'm a former bureaucrat. I was proud to be a bureaucrat. I was able to do some wonderful things when I worked within the system. But if the system itself is allowed to take control of solutions, they will look through their blinkers and not look broader at the other resources and the other visions of the problem that is needed. And what happened in our task force was you and I and Kyle, when he was there.
Kyle Mason,
was a wonderful influence. I still remember when he faced down the assistant superintendent and said, education is the new buffalo, for the Indigenous community. And but we were marginalized all of a sudden when and I think both of us, but I probably was a little more outspoken.
Imagine that, Sel.
Became a bit of a problem. All of a sudden, there were no more meetings. We had an assistant superintendent of Winnipeg 1 at one of those meetings, and we were saying we wanted to really work with the grade 11s, 10s, and 11s. And she said, oh, well, what's the point? They're lost already. And which, of course, being a little blunt, I said, and you're the assistant superintendent responsible for secondary schools, and you didn't do anything so they wouldn't be lost? Well, she left and never came to another meeting. And, we have to hold the bureaucracies accountable, but if you don't do it in a respectful way, they'll cut you off.
And that's the danger, because in the end, it's not our feelings that get hurt. It's the fact that kids who should be graduating will be impacted in a negative way.
And I want to tell another positive story, because it's so easy to get caught up in the negative. Norquay School, which is the elementary school in North Point Douglas, had a wonderful principal, and I'm blocking out her first name. Her last name was Dick. Anyway, and I'd been bugging her about absenteeism. This is probably about 7-8 years ago. And, she called me up early in the next year. She said, Sel, half of my kids, no, I guess it was in November, that's right. Half of my kids that graduated from grade 6 are no longer attending school. Now, there are only 13 that finished grade 6, but 7 of them had stopped attending school. And like a really good teacher administrator would, she went and found those kids, even though they were gone off to St. John's, and she talked to them about, why aren't you going to school? And there were mostly home reasons, but she said, well, look, one of the reasons was they were afraid to walk to St. John's because it was pretty scary territory to walk through. So she went out and organized some stuff with them. But for the next grade 6 group, she went out and raised a couple of $1,000 and bought bus passes.
Amazing. Yeah.
And the next year there were 14 kids who graduated, and 13 of the 14 attended regularly. And I said to her, it wasn't only the bus passes. The second thing was, maybe even more important, was once a month those kids had to come in and see you or the vice principal and talk to you to get their next bus pass.
Yeah.
And if they were having trouble, you'd pick up the phone and phone the principal of St. John's and straighten things out. They had an adult who cared about whether they attended school or not. Now, the pressures when they get up in grade 10, 11, and 12 become even more so.
The challenge, I guess, is it's multivariate problem.
Yeah.
You have systemic issues where at a school board level there's challenges that need to be addressed. But then in contrast, you have on the front lines, you have staff and teachers whose hearts are really there for the kids. And I know St. John's, when we that was the data we could gather, but I just know that Doug has done so much over there as principal to try to address issues of absenteeism.
Oh yeah, and the kids that are attending, they're getting pretty good quality education and a lot of community supports and stuff. I'm going to tell you another story. It goes back 35 years. I'm rec director out of Dufferin School, where the Freight House, one of my babies, is now. And I had a bunch of kids, and one of them was JJ, and he was 12, and he wasn't going to school. Big, tough kid, and so, talk to him, and, I can't handle that place, blah, blah, blah. They throw me out every year. And that was what had happened. So in those days, they had some storefront schools, went over a paint store. I got him in there, 10 kids who couldn't handle school with 2 teachers. Well, he went on to get his social work degree and become one of the top experts in Manitoba on FASD. So the kids that aren't attending school, that are being blocked, he had a pretty rough family. And Winnipeg Education Centre actually played a huge role in keeping him or getting him into that social work degree. But we're not only losing individuals, we're losing talent that the community needs, that input that kids have that are not getting an education, that undervalues the potential they can contribute to the larger society.
The cost is difficult to even calculate.
Yeah.
I talked with a community foot patrol officer. Again, who just, another, he brought another angle where this is how it's costing us.
Yeah.
He's talking about kids that are not in attendance during the middle of the day. So what are they doing? Well, they're out, stealing from 7-Eleven. They're out causing trouble. They're out causing problems for them as beat cops who are in the neighborhood. And so when you just think about the depth of the problem, a little bit of, what are we hearing in the community as to the challenges? What are you hearing from teachers as to how they feel about this?
A lot of sense of despair, a lot of sense of somebody's got to do something about it. The numbers are huge. We just got another bunch of stats, and it's not just Winnipeg, but in Frontier School Division, which is our northern school division, 59% of the kids, 59% of all the students in Frontier School Division have missed more than 18 days of school. Winnipeg won 29%. Well, from those stats on Calvin, it's not in the middle class areas. They're going. It's our inner city kids that are missing those school days. Yeah. And the individuals, like individual principals and school teachers, try to do their best, but until the system steps up, and I continually talk about the big systems, the big systems that get the most money, the education system, child and family services system, the justice system. They got huge budgets, and they could squeeze enough money out to deal with this issue if they so chose.
It's about everybody working together. Yep. I had a resource teacher, and of course all of this is on the down low. I had a resource teacher tell me that after spring break, the school that she works in is a ghost town, in her words.
That's right.
Another teacher that told me if there's 23 kids in my class, to have 13 present is completely acceptable. So it gives us a sense of the depth of the problem. I think we've got the point through that it is a problem and we need to be addressing it. Now, what's where to from here in terms of lessons we've been learning in this process? I think for me, I've been reflecting, and I feel as though we got our pushback was sort of like a denial that there was a problem. We got some of that from one group, but the deeper you drill down, it's commonly understood. I think the idea, it's such a big problem that people are sort of challenged to, like, how do we step into this?
Yeah, but except they know what to do. Mm-hmm. They know what has to be done, but they're dull and boring. Their lack of creativity to respond to these kids. You and I both know that the kids who are not attending school have serious issues in their home or their foster home. And let's be really blunt about this. Both my daughters were probation officers many, many years ago. One of my daughters retired now, just puts that in context. A kid never came out of the youth center or Agassiz Center for Youth without an education plan and seamlessly moved into it. Difficulties, kids running, all the sort of thing. But the plan was there. The education system had responded. Now we see kids coming out of those centers sitting at home for 2-3 weeks trying to get them into a school. Well, I'm sorry. There should be no question about trying to get them into. It doesn't have to be a regular school, but these are the kids that we know are going to be in trouble. They're already in trouble with the law. We must have them seamlessly moving into some kind of educational program. It could be a workplace. It could be, some of the programs that have work placements along with it. The need to do things differently. One of the things historically, I talked about JJ going to this storefront, over the paint store. One of the things Winnipeg One brilliantly did is said, we've got all these kids who don't fit in school. Why don't we open Argyle School for all these kids that don't fit into school? Well, it works really well for middle-class kids who are school phobic and stuff like that. But for our tough inner-city kids, I think they need to go back and looking at those small groupings outside of school buildings. I'm sorry, I'm getting sidetracked on very specific things. Yeah. But just think of it. We have got all these kids coming out of the youth center who have probation officers. Mm-hmm. Those kids need to be in an educational program. whatever amount of resources that is needed should be pumped into making sure those, talk about surrounding those kids. Those are our number one priority.
Yeah.
Number two, we've got a whole 10,000 kids in Manitoba that are in foster homes. It's in the qualifications and expectations of foster parents to report if their foster children are not attending. Well, we know a substantial number. Now, most foster homes are great and wonderful. I've got one right across the street that is just fantastic. But we have foster parents whose foster children are not attending school, and the social workers don't know it. And then the same group of community support unit cops that you talk to, they come and sit in my kitchen, and they talk in frustration when they pick up a kid who's absent from school, and they call the social worker, and the social worker says, oh, well, school absenteeism isn't a priority.
Yeah. The interesting thing, I know the last sort of challenge we got, I'm really encouraged by the fact that Kelvin Gertsen is taking on the role of Minister of Education, and I'm hopeful that this evaluation that's planned, that we've got some fresh eyes on the problem. But really, some of the things that need to happen don't cost us anything.
No.
Even a thing like communication. For me, this was one of the things that, as I was talking to people, teachers in the community, asking, are you hearing that the issue of absenteeism is a priority to address? And the answer across the board was no.
Exactly.
And so what does it cost to let people know that this is important?
Yeah.
What does it cost for employment income assistance before they maybe issue that check when a family has moved to ensure that the kids have registered in school? What does it cost for justice, just to put that plan together when a kid comes from Manitoba Youth Center to get them streamlined right into school?
Nothing. But I want to, you mentioned Kelvin Gertsen, and I've met him. I like him. But, he's number 6 of Ministers of Education. His...
It's my youthful optimism.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful too. But his assistant, over a month ago, asked us for 3 suggestions that were no cost or low cost that they could get on right away. And he said he'd get back to us in a couple of weeks. Well, that's 6 weeks now. They haven't even bothered to get back to us. My experience of being patted on the head by people I really liked and respected, these other ministers of education, were just as committed as Kelvin Gertsen is. Now, they're going to bury this issue in their big task force.
Yeah.
Well, that's what my fear is.
Or will it be a priority?
Yeah.
Will it be a priority?
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of we've kind of opened up the conversation, and we've gotten deep into things here. One of the things over my 33 years of doing work in the North End and connecting the community is what always brings me back is we always have to return to what it's about, and that's the kids.
That's right.
And so we deal with big systems, we deal with big challenges within those systems, but my heart goes out to families that just can't get their kids to get to school and this is where my heart really beats.
And we have to recognize that some of those families, the moms, there's absentee fathers, they're not parenting at all.
Right.
These moms are depressed, they have issues in their lives. We see what meth is doing to so many homes that you cannot put blame on the people that, in a middle class case, you could say, hey, the parents have got a responsibility, the kids have got a responsibility. The reality is, in many of the homes, probably a majority, the home is not a healthy place for those kids. And society has a responsibility to those homes.
Takes a village.
Yeah,
we all need to get involved. Sel, thank you so much for riffing with me here in the Story Studio.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your heart and the many years of commitment you've given to our community. I really, really appreciate your friendship and your passion.
Well, I appreciate being invited, and I look forward to us working shoulder to shoulder on this issue and a few others.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And thank you for watching.